Hello. Today we're discussing a little snippet from an interview, and I didn't want to open with that interview. So, hello, here's my face. Now here's the clip.
Мне кажется, что сейчас весь хип-хоп и вообще все музыкальные жанры, они на самом деле электронные.
All genres are really electronic. It's a blistering hot take. When I watched this interview, which is amazing if you like subtitles, I was like, goddamn, like, I don't know. This interview is full of, these guys are really fucking smart. But anyway, that line stuck with me because the very first thing I thought of, again, something I've talked about before, is metal production and how everything is quantized to the grid. A lot of albums don't even use real drums anymore. All the amps are plug-in effects. It is a lot more electronic than analog, and every year they keep making new plugins that make it easier to never have to actually touch real instruments. Some albums now don't even have a bass player. You can just sample bass. It's religious guitar that you can't get away with yet. And vocals, obviously, unless you're making Vocaloid metal. Anyway, I wanted to explore just this little tiny nugget that this dude dropped because I think a lot of people's gut reaction to this is, well, no, because blah 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 blah, and like, yeah, we're just gonna explore it a little bit. In order to really get into this, I feel like it's probably best to define electronic music, right? Because when you say electronic music, historically it doesn't just have synthesized instruments, right? Electronic music dating back to whenever, it's got real vocals a lot of the time and real bass a lot of the time. Any number of other sampled or like clips, or even just we used a real bass on this. I know like Deadmau 5, he talked about working with real actual bass players. So when we say electronic music, of course it's not 100% electronic. You know, you can have the vocals, chances are they're a real person. You can also have like heavily modified vocals like Daft Punk. Those vocals started as them. It's not like they were synthesized vocals. So with that in mind, saying every genre more or less is electronic music isn't saying that every single aspect of it is electronic. Now, it's moving that direction for sure, but why that take was just so spicy to me is because by that definition, metal meets that criteria, or like normal, like modern production metal, where basically every element of it is fake except the vocals and the guitars and questionably the bass. Not necessarily is fake, but can be fake. Of course, it depends on band to band. But the thing is, the Abstracted Records workflow, we're not the only people with this type of workflow. I'm sure a lot of bands, just as a matter of pride, their drummer will bang out the songs the way they would play it, and then they just fucking sample them anyway. And it's like, okay, I mean, did he play it? Yes, he played it. Is this a recording of him? Absolutely not. That's how a lot of records are made now, sorry to say, and all those drums are on the grid. They're playing different beats than electronic music, but when you think of electronic music, you think of robotic, pounding, repetitive drums that are all perfectly on time, and that's just metal as well. Now, he was also talking about like hip-hop and pop music, and I feel like it's far less of a stretch to call all of those genres electronic. Like, just objectively speaking, if you put on a rap album, almost all of the instruments are going to just be synthesizers or samples, like found samples from old records, depending on who you're listening to. But gone are the days, largely, of a hip hop album that has real drums and bass. And that's been the norm for a while in that genre. And yeah, even with pop, I get it. Like, it's rare that you're gonna have real drums, and the majority of, I mean, Lady Gaga, obviously, but like T Swift, synthesized, Ariana Grande, it's all synthesizers, right? Billie Eilish, there might be one or two real instruments on that album. Maybe it's all synth. These are all electronic music albums, though they're pop albums, they're rap albums. At the core of it, they're all electronic. So the characteristics of largely electronic instruments, e.g. synthesizers or what have you, non-acoustic electronic devices to make music, right? That aside, the workflow is kind of the other aspect of this, and that should be the more obvious aspect. Everything is made on a computer, which is an electronic device, right? Which is why this argument probably wouldn't stand for someone like Dave Grohl or the White Stripes guy. I'm sure he records everything on a fucking tape machine with real amps. I'm sure his workflow rarely touches a computer. I'm sure he's got all analog synthesizers. I don't even know. I've heard a couple of his songs, and I heard like one person talk about him one time, and I was like, yeah, that tracks. I'm just assuming that's what he's like. But I know Dave Grohl's all analog everything. You can tell he doesn't even tune his vocals. And yeah, fine. That's not electronic music. But like Imagine Dragons is. It depends on your definition. Like, I'm not saying rock music is electronica now, obviously, but that brand of rock music, the extremely bombastic, super blown out, compressed, multi-layered, super hard tuned, over processed, that's electronic. It's rock, but it's electronic also. Same with metalcore, same with the gent. I always think of Periphery, but Periphery is trying so hard to get away from that now. Their shit's like real raw and really like gritty and whatever, and it's like, oh, some of those might even be real instruments. Maybe might have actually played those drums. Anyway, it's all made on a computer, and that argument is a little more weird. Like I was saying in my other video about going to school, how I was making symphonic death metal, and my professor was like, you can't turn this in because it's electronic music. And it's like, it's death metal. It's classically inspired death metal. Is it electronic music? Genre-wise, no, but it's made on a computer. It's entirely made on a computer. And this is where it kind of changes things, because literally speaking, yes, it's electronic music. And if I managed to write out all the scoring parts on paper and give them to a real orchestra and record them XY to a tape machine, then it wouldn't be, probably. I don't know. The writing still would be. It would blur the line a little bit. But yeah, basically all music now is electronic. All of the tools that we use, that any normal people uses, it's all just in the computer now. And that influences how we write. It's so much easier now to copy paste into loop parts. And once the advent of that happened, of like electronic genres, and it's just like, oh, it's super easy to just have that loop. That's what gave way to like early techno and electronic music now, right? Before you had that, you just had to play the thing over and over again, and so you would naturally introduce variations, because humans get bored really, really easily. And you just tell a bass player to just loop this, like, he's gonna be bored while you're fucking around doing your thing. He's gonna come up with other stuff. Same with the drummer, same with everyone. And in that sense of everything is now electronic, I feel like there is something lost there. Not every band needs to be like a wanky jam band, but even myself, I find, I can just copy this drum part over and then that's it. Like, if I was really playing it, I'd probably add some different fills. I wouldn't be like a robot. But it's like, and I'm kind of curious how far that can be pushed in other genres. Um, how bad would it have to be in a rock or a metal album before you even noticed how copy pasted and how repetitive the drums are? Because we haven't had real drums for years, but my music isn't exactly like a standard for that thing. And I'm not sure if you can really tell from listening. I mean, it depends. It depends on who you are. The tools that computers and electronic music making devices introduced naturally lended themselves to repetitive, no variation type of writing. And I think that it's absolutely no coincidence now that all of the most popular plugins and even genres, like we talked about with like timbre, the way things sound, it's all washy and detuned, and it sounds vintage, it sounds tape, because people are sick of the like super pristine, processed, bang on in tune, everything sounds really clean and really plastic. And it's just like, no, because anyone can do that now, because you can just, hell, you can go to Best Buy or Staples and just like find a MacBook, and you could just like write a song on, like, not even leaving the store. Just show up and write yourself a song and export it to MP3 and email it to yourself, and like it would have the intonation and the brightness and the polish that people in the 80s would have fucking killed for. It's like, why are these synths? You have 10 layers of synth and they're all perfectly in tune because they're not all fucky. And it's like, yeah, because it's just like that. And it's easy to do that now. So people are now looking the other way, right? What we think sounds good is stuff that's like kind of washy and drony, just like fucky like that, right? And even me, like, when my production really stepped up a level, it was because I got the Softube tape emulator and put it on literally every fucking channel. Not every channel, like every bus. When I was mixing, I'd export down the stems and I'd put the tape machine right across the board, and anything that wasn't pitched, or some things that were pitched, I would put the tape wobble. And like, that doesn't sound like it does much, but holy shit, like that's the mark. If people were like going back through and it's just like, oh, that's when things got a lot better. That's one of the reasons, is just because I threw tape on everything. This is just the sound that people like now, because it always oscillates, right? And in the 90s and 2000s, we had a lot of like super pristine, polished, plasticky, hyper in tune synthesizers, because this was the advent of digital synthesizers. And now it's like, no, fuck that. We like lo-fi hip hop beats to study and relax to. And I see that as a rebellion against the super polished, super clean synth sound. People don't like that. Now it sounds dated, ironically. That it's like when it's all kind of washy and fluttery and fucked up, it's got character. It sounds more genuine. And that's because we make everything on a computer, and the default state of it is super clean, super precise, always bang on tune, and always the same. Which, up until the 90s and 2000s, musicians would have absolutely killed for that amount of precision, right? Because if you wanted to recreate something perfectly before synthesizer, I know synthesizers came earlier, but like we're talking like everything, right? If you had some insane drum performance and something in the recording process fucked up, like, you're just shit out of luck. Your drummer better to just be able to do that amazing thing again. And now I can sit here and program something that like only God could play, and I can just go and just like hit play, pause over and over. It'll just be the same 100 times. And musicians didn't have that like for forever until very recently. And now it seems like people are kind of sick of it. Maybe it's reached its logical limit for how like clean and repetitive something can be. The thing is, like, even with Daft Punk, like, they added a ton of variation. Like, even if the around the world, like, yeah, okay, it's repetitive, sure. But if you're listening to the drums, especially like the hi-hats and all the little backing stuff, they're always changing it. They're filter sweeping it. They're like changing rhythms. They're doing all this stuff to keep it fresh, and you don't know it's there, but it is there. And it's definitely not the same as just taking a drum beat and just looping it for 3 minutes. I would know. I've tried. You have to add that variation because we humans and our human brains, after a while of hearing something that's exactly identical, it starts to just become invisible, right? And you don't want your drums to just disappear from the listener. It's like, if you're like laying down near a stream or a waterfall, and after 15-20 minutes you stop hearing it because your brain just filters out repetitiveness. And if you just had like a drum beat just with absolutely no change, your brain would filter it out eventually. So you have to add that sort of variation, these little details and nuances, and they did that. They're like the textbook for that. God, they're so good. Yeah. Otherwise it's just dull, and it just sucks, and there's only so much that vocals can cover up for, in my opinion. Hell, it could be why songs are getting shorter too. You listen to like a new like pop or rap album, all the songs are like a minute 30 or like 2 minutes. You used to at least get songs that are like 3 minutes 20, 3 minutes 30, That is a thing. Like, songs are getting shorter. And I think that's largely a part of it. It could just be general attention span, but you don't get long intros anymore. You get maybe like half a repetition and then you're right into verse 1 or right into the chorus. You don't really get bridges. You seldom get pre-choruses. It's very like songs are stripped down, so they're just like a minute 30, just like in, out. And yeah, it could be TikTokifying things. Could just be like general attention span. Like, this is all we need to get the person's attention. We just want the listen. We want them to come back, which I do like. I'm always on the side of making songs shorter rather than longer because then people listen to it again. Not for the Spotify numbers, just because like when a song is super long and somebody skips it, that sucks. And it's better to have them be like, wow, that was short, and then play it again. Nails. That's straight from an interview from Nails. They said the exact same thing, and I love it. Yeah. So in conclusion, what Nick is saying in this clip isn't all music is electronica now. But he's saying like the process for all these different genres that we listen to is much more similar than it ever used to be. At least that's what I'm taking away from it. Genres, weirdly enough, though we're exploring the extremes of tons of different things, metal is getting more whatever you call current deathcore, that we're pushing limits in all the different genres as society does. But at the same time, seemingly paradoxically, production and the way that these genres are made is more similar, and it has more in common with electronic music than anyone would have assumed back in the 70s and 80s, right? And yeah, because everything's done on computer, almost everything. I'm always gonna leave Dave Grohl and Jack White or whatever his name is out of this. This time they're the exception, and metal people aren't the exception. It's not like every genre he's claiming has like silly trance synth, right? It's not about that. It's about the workflow and the process that music is made is now an entirely electronic workflow. He was talking about how for his music, for I Speak, he's got a laptop, and he's like, everything can happen in the laptop. These instruments that are in this room, they're just for fun if I get bored. And so it is with a lot of things. The only real exception that metal gets this time is that as of now, I think sampled guitar sounds too shitty. And you need vocals. But any normal genre is going to have real vocals, right? We ain't talking about Vocaloid and anything else. Like, if it's going to be played on the radio or listened to, it's probably going to have vocals, and they're probably going to be real people. So, that aside, the workflow for all these different genres has become very, very similar, which is interesting. And this is kind of the first time in history that that's happened. I guess that was actually in closing. Until next time.